You know, a lot of times when people think about sharing about Jesus, people think, oh, I've got to know all this Bible and all that kind of thing. Honestly, it has really very little to do with how much Bible you know. You can impact people in radical ways, especially by sharing your story and what Jesus has done for you. And you're an expert on that as far as how Jesus has impacted your life. Even if you're a new believer and just barely met Jesus, you can share the story about Jesus. And it's interesting because Jesus calls us to be witnesses of him. And a witness is actually a word that they use, we still use it in courts and in a legal sense of somebody that's an eyewitness saying, hey, I saw that, I can testify that this is true. And that's pretty much what it is to tell and to share your story. One of the things that's been really helpful for me too, to share my story, mine's, really messy in a lot of ways as far as coming from a background of being an atheist and being very against Jesus and making fun of Jesus, and also just being in a place of being really depressed and wanting to die. And so, and just hurting in a really big way, as well as my sexual abuse and those kind of things. So what I like to do is share a lot of those things as soon as possible with people, because it helps people to tear down walls and to open up themselves. Because as we talked about, the world and the way that it's set up is everybody's trying to be the put together people, wearing the mask like their lives are perfect and that kind of thing. And so it just really helps people when you share your story, especially the messier, the more open you are with it. It helps people to get more real about their needs, which opens their heart. So I want to talk about that, and I want to take you to a record like this, where a woman that had a very messy background shared her story, and it really impacted a lot of people. So, and you see some of the principles that we've been talking about here in John chapter 4 and in verse 7. It says, a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, how is it, you being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. So I want to look at this because there's already a lot of principles in here right alone. This was shocking to her that Jesus spoke to her, because in that culture, for one, women were not respected at all. They were thought to not really be able to think, or they just didn't have a lot of rights back in those days. So just being a woman was somebody that you wouldn't necessarily speak with. But then on top of that, she was a Samaritan, and they were despised by the Jews. So much so that the Jews thought of the Samaritans as being like animals, not even real human beings. It was a racism that was so intense. It was just, for many of us, it would be hard to maybe imagine something to this degree, that you just would not speak to a woman of Samaria. Maybe similar to the racism, especially when it was extremely intense in our country during the days of slavery, where Americans were not thought of as being equal human beings. So this was similar to the way that culture was viewing this woman. She's Samaritan, and she's a woman. And here Jesus is talking to her. So we see a few things here. One, he's hanging out where people congregate. Where people got water at the well was a place that people went. Everybody was there. Everybody had to get water. And of course, around the well, people would chat and be social and that kind of thing. It just wasn't a given that a Jew would speak to a Samaritan woman, but it was a social place. So you see that. You see Jesus circulating among the people as usual, being the social guy that he is. And you see him initiating the conversation. He's not waiting for somebody to come talk to him. He's reaching out to the woman. And also just that he's demonstrating God's love and acceptance by reaching somebody that is out of his normal comfort zone and culture. And we want to be people like that too. That everybody that we love with the love of God, even if they're not our normal social circle. And then it says in verse 10, Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. So this is interesting too, because Jesus kind of throws out a little teaser. You see, he doesn't talk her head off. He kind of puts something out there that's kind of could be of interest and could be meeting a need, and see how she responds. Remember how we talked about the fact that you want to ask questions and listen and orient what you're sharing to the person's need, and then you give them a little bit and see how they respond. So Jesus gave her a little bit and took a look at how she's responding, and she says, he's like, oh, if you knew who I was, I could give you some living water. And then in verse 11, the woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? So you see that she's, he got her attention, but she's asking questions. She's open in the conversation. And then we go down to verse 13. It says, and Jesus said to her, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, talking about the regular water, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. And the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. She's like, that sounds great. I would love some of that. So he's talking about, it's kind of exciting that he's sharing about his purpose and why he came, that it's in Jesus, that Jesus is life-giving and having a relationship with him, and that's the one place that we will get replenished and never thirst again. So he shares that with her, and she's like, I like the sound of that. It reminds me sometimes what I do in sharing as far as the gospel goes is I might talk a little bit about my relationship and my marriage. I'll share the story of my struggles as far as the relationship thing and God's healing and how he was there for me and turned my life around, and that now am married to a wonderful man and have a great relationship and an awesome marriage. And so that sometimes gets people's attention in the relationship department, where people are like, oh, what did you learn? I'd like to hear more about that. So that's how she responds. And then in verse 16, Jesus said to her, Go, call your husband and come here. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You have well said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you have now is not your husband, in that you spoke truly. Now, this, especially for biblical times, is scandalous. They didn't shack up back then. That wasn't a thing. This was like she had been with several men before that, and now she's living with a guy and she's not even married. Normally people would have an incredible amount of shame about this, but what's really beautiful is how Jesus speaks to her in a way that's love, that sees her, that understands, with compassion, with love, with acceptance. Another thing that's interesting here is, as I spoke to you about this before, is you can ask God to help you when you're sharing with people about Jesus. I do this all the time, and this is a really key principle. When you're sharing and you want to reach people, pray and ask God what to say. Ask even while you're speaking to somebody. I love to just really rely and trust in God and not just in my flesh as far as what to speak. And God will give you words that will really reach that person's heart, that's one of a kind for them. It's like you can be there where you speak and people say, wow. I've heard this. People said, I feel like God just sent you to me. We teach our leadership, we teach people how to reach people and to talk to people that are total strangers, and how to help them to open their heart and things like that. And I remember, there's so many stories, so many great, great stories where people are asking, God, okay, where do we go, God? Who do we speak to? And where God's spoken really specific things, where God said, this is a great story where God told a couple of the people that were in our leadership training program, go look for a guy who's sitting by a fire eating some fish. Pretty wild, right? Like, you're sitting there, you could think, well, that's crazy. That's probably doesn't make any sense at all. But would it really hurt to be looking for a guy? How much would it really hurt you to start looking around to think about who you might be speaking to look for a guy eating fish by a fire? And sure enough, they wound up finding a guy sitting by a fire eating fish, and that guy wound up coming. He was an atheist. He got saved. His life changed forever, and now he's on fire for God and really excited and serving and passionate about his faith and sharing with other people. But even during your conversations with people, you can ask God what to say, that you can be present for them. And God will give you words to speak, to minister to their hearts, just like he did Jesus. And we're going to see later in this series that he does it for people that you don't even have to be Jesus to have God speak to you in this way. He did it for regular old believers like you and me, and he still does that today. So he's telling her that these things that God revealed to him about her life. And then in verse, we'll go down to verse 28, it says, the woman then left her water pot, went her way into the city, and said to the men, "Come, see a man who told me all the things I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" she said. Then they all went out of the city and came to him. You know what's cool? She's not even sure that this is Jesus. She's saying, it could be. Maybe this is real, you know? And so that's what I said. You don't have to know it all. You don't even have to have walked with God for a long time to make a difference and to share what you do know or what you have seen. Maybe it's that, hey, I'm not sure if Jesus is real, but I've seen some healing. I met some people whose lives have changed. I've seen his love. I don't know. Whatever you've seen, you can share. So if she goes and shares and she says, this might be the real deal. This could really be Jesus because he told me all about me. So she's speaking up and spreading the word and sharing it right away. And then in verse 39 it said, and many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans had come to him, they urged him to stay with them. He stayed there another 2 days. So Jesus hanging out with people, being social, spending time. And it says in verse 41, and many more believed because of his own word. Then they said to the woman, now we believe, not because of what you said, for we ourselves have heard him, and we know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world. This is one woman, and she's a Samaritan, and she changed the lives in an entire city. This is exciting, guys, because you're not limited by what your background is. Sometimes people have had doubts about, well, who am I? You know? Maybe you're thinking, I'm not even educated or whatever. This is a woman that in her culture was kind of low man of the totem pole. She was somebody that would not have been respected. She's a woman and a Samaritan. Not somebody that you would think would have that kind of influence. But God works with people that are willing, that have a desire to serve, that open their mouths to be bold to share. And you're not limited by whatever your background is. God can use that to his glory. He can use your story of what Jesus has done for you to reach people and to change lives. We can be world changers. We can change the world one life at a time by introducing them to Jesus.